You make friends, you end up hiring people, you end up getting investors, like all kinds of stuff that you need at a company can happen just by talking to a lot of people about it.
Welcome to Brick by Brick. My name is Rishi Taparia, co-founder and general partner at Garuda Ventures. And today, I'm excited to have Shreyans Bhansali join us. Shreyans has had an amazing journey from Indonesia, where we first met, to college at UPenn, consulting, and then joining Venmo as employee number 1, after which he went on to co-found 2 companies. I'm thrilled to have him here. Shreyans, welcome.
Hey, good to see you after a while. Great to chat. Excited to be here.
And so let's jump in. Maybe you could take us before your tech career on your journey from Jakarta to UPenn and then into consulting.
Yeah. Well, I guess largely I think about how I got into tech. And it started in middle school where I got my first computer and I loved being on it. I loved the feeling of being on it, but I had no idea what to do. I had the internet, would browse around a little bit, but mostly I think I remember like my earliest memories just being like just typing things or like copying things. So it just felt so good to be on it. And then in high school, I got excited about computers in a new way. I had a friend, David Gibb, in high school who got me into Linux. He showed me this huge world that was like this brand new, very exciting world of free software and like the amazing things you could do for no money on your computer. It was like you can download this stuff and like have this incredible software that felt really different than anything else we had. So that was really exciting. And then games were really exciting. Like, I remember being at high school in GIS, my homeroom was the computer lab. Every morning for 10, 15 minutes, we would play Diablo, I think, or something on the homeroom computers. And I was like so excited that I could do this on this computer. I didn't need like a console to play. So I got really into games on the computer, and that got me excited about computer hardware. So like all this stuff got me excited about computers. And then I went to so that was one of the reasons I studied computer science, but I also studied economics. And I don't know if you had Frank Thomas as your economics teacher in high school, but he was this
Oh,
amazing
yes.
guy who got us so excited about how the world of economics worked. And being in Indonesia during the financial crisis, it was like you could see in real life the effects, like in big ways, of these things we were studying. So both of those things are really exciting. I studied both of them at UPenn. Um, but for some reason or the other, the economics side won, and I ended up doing what a lot of people at Penn do, and like tech was just getting started. That was the other thing in the backdrop. Like I graduated in 2005, like a year after Facebook launched, around when Gmail launched. Like it still felt like everything was like really early. It wasn't like the dominant force, at least at a school like UPenn, which is like a finance heavy school. So for various reasons, I ended up going into consulting and moved to Canada, where I eventually became a citizen. So that was like this big thing happening in my life. Uh, and it was a few years after that that like something from college, like I reconnected with my friends from college and then entered the startup world.
Amazing. So let's talk about the start of your tech journey. And what an amazing start it was. Why did a text calling you a super sexy dude convince you to leave a stable job with great pay to join a startup called Venmo? You literally hopped on a plane and moved to another country. Talk about that and what the beginnings of that was.
Yeah, I that was such an exciting moment in my life. And so like a couple of things happened. One, I joined this consulting company. I was never good at it. I never really cared about it. It's like uh, working at a startup feels really different than regular work in a really amazing way. This felt like actual work. Like I answered to other people and had to do things that I didn't really care about or really understand. So I wasn't very good at it. 2008 financial crisis happened and the company had a bunch of layoffs. So I got laid off. I got this other job that paid twice as much, was half the work at TD Bank. It just happened to be extremely dull for me. There was no creativity. There was no building of anything. You weren't really producing much. And the people I was around were really nice, but like didn't get me energized. So that's what was happening in my life. At the same time, like over those 4 years that I did that, these two friends of mine, my two closest friends from college, they knew when they left college, they didn't want to work for anyone else. They had like an entrepreneurial bent and they were willing to go through a lot of what others might see as difficulty, but they saw as simplicity, maybe, or like freedom and simplicity to explore their entrepreneurial itch. So they started lots of small projects with each other. There were like websites we launched, like we were at the launch parties of in college. They made websites for the Pakistani restaurant near campus. They did all kinds of stuff. And like eventually those experiments and like trying to do something together over the years led to helping a friend start a yogurt shop, setting up the point of sale system for that yogurt shop, getting access to a credit card API for that yogurt shop, and realizing they could use that to send each other money. And somehow, over the few months that they were playing with that, that led to this SMS based payment thing. So they could pay each other back when they were going between New York and Philly where they lived. And at some point, I went there. I was like, this is really cool what you guys are doing. And then the moment I got back home to Canada, I got this text. I was like, holy shit, this thing that they were talking about, like, it's in my pocket.
It
It
actually
works.
works.
I have some money here now because of this text he sent. And it was extremely exciting. I started chatting with them about it. I like sent them thoughts on like strategy. They sent me a pitch deck that they were working on. I commented on it and like they could see that I was really into it. And it just felt like there was this brand new world emerging and they were tapped into it now. And I was sitting in this office doing this thing that I did not care one bit for. Um, I got my bonus a few weeks later. I was like, this chapter of my life, like I'm very happy for it to be over. And they asked me to join them. They knew, I mean, they were very much of the mindset that like we want to hire smart people we already know. And I was one of the first people they asked. And yeah, it was immediately super exciting to me. Like I wanted to work with them. This idea seemed really cool. And it was like the chance at a very different new life, which was super exciting. So yeah, I sold everything. I moved down. No, that was it. I also, when I think about that time, like my parents were worried about the risk of it. And in my mind, it was a risk-free move. Like I felt very much that I was entering this space, the tech space, that so much was going to happen that no matter what happened to Venmo, it was going to work out well for me. I remember like looking through this doc that I wrote. I had this Word doc of like thinking through it, and it really felt like there was no way this could go wrong for me. So yeah, that's how it felt like it felt the opposite of risk. It was like a gift.
No, that it's so interesting you say that because that reminds me of a friend of mine, Paul Davison, had a saying, a startup may fail, but startups will never fail. And so your ability to take your learnings and lessons from one and move on to the next and move on to the next is incredibly powerful and gives you the leg up. And so it's not as risky as it may seem. So it completely resonates. And when I think about, some of my fondest times at both Point and Legion were when we were a small team that could fit in a conference room talking about all these audacious goals that we had and how do we go hit them together, justifying our reason for existence every single day. And that's such a magical time. And you've said it yourself, the early days, small teams can feel like magic. What was
Yeah.
it at Venmo, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, the early days of Venmo were like really incredible to me. Um, the two guys, Ikram and Cortina, who I joined to build it, they were just very special guys. That was a really special part of it. The way they operated was really different than anyone else I had worked with. In the consulting world, everyone's buttoned up, and everyone else I had seen work before that was also similarly buttoned up. There were like rules they were following. In this case, there were no rules. There was no playbook. There was like we none of us had ever worked in payments before. I hadn't really built anything on the internet before this. So it was this brand new open space. It felt like we didn't have to follow any rules. We could make up new rules for how to live, like sharing an office and living space and not caring about that designing things in your space any way you want, um, setting up the life you want to live, like your work life. Like you can work whenever you want, you can take any time off whenever you want. I remember we used to go for workouts in the middle of the day, and all these things seem like really like regular things now. But back then, like when all you know is like a buttoned up corporate world, it felt like such a huge amount of freedom. So that was an incredible part of it. And the other part was that everything that we built was like up to us. Every decision was up to us. We would get together and we would see people doing things in the app and make a decision that day about a really simple but good thing or like a wild new idea. Uh, we could make those decisions in the morning, build it in the afternoon, ship it at night, and see people using it the next day. And like the speed of it, the freedom of it, it was unlike anything else. So it was really exciting. We felt like our destiny was in our hands.
What was it like transitioning for you to that level of freedom, having come from a very buttoned up world? And what lessons did you have to unlearn from the structure, maybe of school to college to consulting to TD and all of the buttoned up? And how did you unlearn those lessons to allow yourself that freedom?
I think I had the fortune or the misfortune of never learning those other lessons. I was just not built for
Nice.
their environment.
Sure.
I never myself wanted a boss, but didn't really put it in those words the way these friends had. Um, it wasn't as obvious an option of how I do it, but it was always, I think, what I was supposed to do. Which is why, I mean, since then, I've pretty much only been at startups. Um, so yeah, I didn't have a lot to unlearn. I think it was naturally how I worked, but the the people around me at Venmo helped me learn everything else that I needed to learn. Like they were incredible role models. Worked harder than I had ever worked before. It didn't feel like hard work, but they did. Like I would show up at 7 in the morning and Cortina would already be there. I would leave at 10:30 to go home and he would still be working. And like when you're in that environment where people are either working a certain way naturally or being creative a certain way very freely, it just starts to feel like that is how it should be. So
Yeah,
yeah, I learned a
they're
lot, not
modeling the
formally.
behaviors.
Yes, they just modeled things really well. They were very good at modeling the things that they were really good at.
And so, when you think about how that impacts the overall culture of a team and, this idea that you mentioned before of the importance of relentless evangelism, especially in the early days of a company, how does that manifest and what are the positive benefits to that modeling, that relentless evangelism, constantly talking about and selling the opportunity?
Yeah, that was one of the really cool and fun parts about early Venmo is basically anywhere we went and anyone we interacted with, they were in our target market. And they were people that we had this excuse to talk to. And we would talk to everyone. We would tell every single person we met about Venmo. We would ask them at a restaurant if they were splitting a bill. We would ask them at a bar if we could buy them a drink, but this is how we would buy them the drink. You know, you ask someone if they want some money, like they will say yes. Um, it was a really easy and fun way to strike up a conversation with anyone. And it was just, like, more useful than so many other ways of figuring out what you should be building. You talk to people, you figure out whether they get the pitch or they don't. You try a new pitch every time you're talking to them. You figure out why they're not interested or why they don't want to sign up or what their fears are. You can ask them some of those things, you can observe it, or you can send people money and see that they didn't cash it in, or they did, and how did they use it? Did they get somebody new onto it? So, yeah, I mean, the early days, we were always out there on the streets telling people about it, getting people signed up, and we got a lot of our early user base that way. So, Cortina lived in New York at the time, and the company was based in Philly in the first couple of years. And in both the places, we like knew the tech community. We would go to all these events. We would sign up all of these people in the tech world, and natural early adopters, they would go off and tell other people about it. And so like we had a bunch of other people evangelizing for us once they saw how useful it was. Yeah, it was really powerful and we got so many other things out of it. Like when you talk to random people about this thing you're really excited about. First of all, if you're excited, they'll feed off that energy, they'll engage. And when you don't know beforehand who they are, what their situation is, it'll just lead you to all kinds of interesting things. So, like, you make friends, you end up hiring people, you end up getting investors, like all kinds of stuff that you need at a company can happen just by talking to a lot of people about it.
Any notable examples of crazy things that happened just by talking to people? Obviously, you attracted a whole bunch of users, but anything else?
We hired a whole bunch of people. So early 2010s tech in my mind is like this really special, nostalgic, but like innocent and beautiful time where I felt like I know that I felt differently about evangelism then than I do now. In that, like, we would all wear Venmo shirts everywhere. Like, there'd be like weeks where like the only thing we would wear would be Venmo shirts. I can't imagine doing that in this stage of my life. But back then it felt like so natural and like obvious and like it wasn't a thing that surrounded us in a way that it felt like we were special and we were different and we were doing something that everybody else wasn't doing. So that kind of made it easy to wear the Venmo shirt everywhere. Ikram and Cortina were in New York wearing the Venmo shirt and they bumped into this guy, Matt, who he was a user. He got excited. They started talking. Matt had just graduated from Columbia and he heard that we were looking for engineers. He's like, well, I know these two guys at Columbia who are computer science grads, super smart, very good friends. They've worked together. So like they know how to work together. Maybe you should talk to them. Oh, I also have this friend from high school in New Jersey who's here as well. He just moved to New York looking for a job as a programmer. We talked to those three people. They introduced us to their friends. Like that one conversation on the street netted us 6 engineers
Wow.
and all amazing. All that sort of knew each other. They're like knew how to work together. It's like the core of our engineering team in 2011 all came from this one conversation. And then like many months later, Matt himself joined us. And yeah, you can't plan for that.
No, absolutely not.
Very difficult to hire that number of good people that quickly any other way. Just you got lucky.
Amazing. Well, and so, every company has its crucible moments, those inflection points that really shape the entire business. Any of those that come to mind, maybe I'll prompt you with South by Southwest 2010.
I mean, yeah, along the lines of early tech feeling really special and like intimate. It felt intimate in New York in those years where you knew a lot of the people who were in the tech world and even the Silicon Valley tech world, like sort of felt intimate. And you could feel that at South by Southwest. Like, I don't know what it's like now. It's probably a very different experience. But in 2010, and this is like early days for me being in the tech world, I knew very little, but we all went to South by Southwest to talk to people on the streets. And back then, there would be like these hot companies that would emerge at that conference that everyone would hear about, everyone would start using. I don't know, we weren't quite that, but we were everywhere. There were like maybe 4 or 5 of us, obviously in Venmo shirts the entire time, and like just talking to everyone we could talk to. And like 2 really cool things happened. One of them, which is like purely good, is you go around talking to people and you meet a bunch of like famous or influential people and you get to pitch to them. And I remember we were at this coffee shop where we would be working during the day and Naval stopped by and we pitched him and he like offered money on the spot. I don't know if he ended up taking or not, but like that blew my mind that who's this dude? He just is going to give us money. He just met us.
Talk
Uh,
about the not buttoned up, right?
oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we were just like, yeah, t-shirts and shorts at a coffee shop and like 10-minute conversation and there's money. So that was really cool. I remember signing up Tim Ferriss on the street, like just sending him some money and having a conversation and like that, that was pretty cool to me back then. Would still be cool now. And there are like a bunch of other like well-known people who had started cool things. I remember like the one of the Uber founders before Uber. I remember hanging out with him and his girlfriend, and like it was just like all like passing by, but like you're all at a bar at night. And then to later go find out that, oh, he was the Stumble Upon founder back then. That was also super cool. That's what is actually really cool to me then. So that kind of stuff happened where like it was small enough and intimate enough that you could meet these people and just have conversations and like cool things could come out of it. The other thing that happened was like very scary, but like also very influential in Venmo's life. Like I said earlier, the yogurt shop is how we got this credit card API. Many months later, while we were flying to South by Southwest, we found that we checked our bank balance and it was negative $40,000. It's like, okay, we know that money is moving and there should always be a little bit like money comes in, money goes, but there's like some amount that should always be there. How did we get so negative? It's because our credit card processor blocked our payouts. So they stopped giving us the money for the transactions that were happening. And they did it because they looked at it and they're like, you're clearly not operating a yogurt shop. Like, what is going on here? So they wanted financial model, financial plan. They wanted to understand how we were going to make money. What is peer-to-peer payments? Like, we don't know what that is. Uh, Again, very different world where like you have all these APIs for things today. None of it existed. Uh, the SMS system we were using, also the slight digression, was also a hack on top of Google Voice. And then I think we became one of Twilio's earliest customers. Um, but the credit card processor did not understand what we were doing. So they demanded we figure out a business model and we presented to them and convinced them that we were legit. And we spent a couple of days doing that. Like we called in some help. We'd never made a financial model before. So somebody helped us with like a spreadsheet, gave us a template. We filled it out, coming up with assumptions, sitting in the hotel room. Like the conference is happening. We're missing all these conversations where we're like building the first financial model for the company and presented it to them. They didn't buy it. Okay, now what do we do? Like how do we three like all edge of unemployed college grads trying to do this payments thing convince this huge company, like one of the largest credit card processors, that we are legit and like that they should convince us that they should let us continue? The way it actually worked out was we then called our investors. One of our investors, his dad happened to be the former CEO of the credit card processor.
Amazing. Talk about
And
value add.
that's like the most useful thing a VC could have done. And he's like, hey, can you let them keep doing what they're doing? And of course, we built a pretty good financial model, etc. But that was the day we got unblocked. Then we were out in the streets having all these conversations, signing everyone up.
Well, and so to talk about that, I mean, that's such a important and pivotal moment. Like some people would have just caved, okay, we're never going to be able to do this. And so let's just pack it up and go find other jobs. You guys obviously found the way through, navigated that together. Was that just obvious, like of course we're going to find a way through? Or talk about kind of your mental approach and kind of the stress levels or not of solving what was a very, very real problem.
Yeah, I mean, at a startup, you do go through a lot of waves of highs and lows and like really believing in the idea or being really doubtful of it. And the same challenge arriving at different moments could feel very different. We were on a high then, like we really believed in it, and a lot of people were reacting really well. So at some level, I think that we would have fought through many things at many moments. But yeah, it was obvious at the time that this makes sense to us, and we can back it up with at least our feeling, if not with a lot of logic, that like it should continue. There were other moments where we faced like 6 months later, things were fine. They were getting new users, but we're still in the thousands. And it wasn't growing super fast. It was hard to convince people to trust us and to do this thing. And Venmo was SMS based and it was like a little clunky. Whatever the reason, it was hard to convince people. And at that point, I remember we talked about pivoting. Or like we sat around a table and we're like, hey, is this what we want to do? Maybe we should, you know, I don't know. Who has the best idea for what we should do? Let's like open it up. And like obviously that was a little crazy and we are like a little too doubtful. But we sat with it for a week and eventually decided, okay, we're still gonna keep going. This still makes sense. But yeah, a challenge hitting you at different times maybe can feel a little bit different. And you have to really like hold on to the really important truths or like the things you believe really strongly and like make sure those still make sense. And if they still make sense, like I think that's I guess what entrepreneurs do. Like you have a big thesis and you're willing to work through a lot of different ups and downs and challenges because like the thesis still holds. And back then it did. And so nothing was going to stop us.
Well, and so much of entrepreneurship is also making decisions with imperfect information, or and taking bets. You know, there and in the company's life, there are going to be a number of these types of moments. Talk about the Venmo friend feed and what was that like internally?
Yeah. I mean, so like I said, we were in the thousands of users, hard to convince people. But something that Venmo always had from the beginning was the idea of a note. With every payment, you added a note. And that little thing was also very contentious, or like not, maybe not as contentious internally, but not very well understood externally. Like, why do I need to explain what this payment is for? But the communication and the social nature of Venmo and the fact that like you're sending money for a reason and the reason should be front and center, not the money. That was always a part of the Venmo ethos. So we always had that. And then we had this challenge of how do we convince people that they should trust us, that they should use it? And how do we explain to people that they can use this for anything? Like Venmo is, it's not for a particular reason. It's not for like restaurants or rent or beers or whatever. It's for all of those things and so many more. So how do you convince people that they should use it? And how do you explain to people how they should use it? Those are the problems. And like the idea at the time, like felt fairly straightforward that, well, what if we just made a feed of what's happening? And the early versions of the feed were like fake payments that would swipe, but like those somehow felt wrong. And it just somehow felt like we're not going to capture enough diversity in that. And we're not going to capture your friends in that. That's the other thing. Like maybe you want to see people who you know sending money, and that makes it a lot more real and you trust it a lot more. Like, oh yeah, Dave uses it. Maybe it's more legit than I thought. So those things led to the friend feed. And then there was like the other question of whether that friend feed should be public and if your payments should be public. Is it like you just see the payments of the people you're connected with, or is there a feed before any of that happens? And if you want people to get social proof and you want to explain to people how they should use it before they sign up, it needs to be public. And so like it all made sense, but it was extremely contentious how we should make payments public. Should it be default public? Should it be default private? And it's very unlikely that somebody flips it to public. And we went back and forth many times, like back and forth in the conversation and back and forth in what we actually did in the app. And ultimately, after a lot of conversation, it I think ended up being right that we should have a public feed. Like I was probably on the side a lot of the time against it. I wanted it. Maybe I don't think I was pragmatic enough and I was like a little bit too idealistic or not creative enough to figure out how to solve this problem without making it a public feed. The public feed is like the simple answer. So yeah, we talked about it for like 2 years probably in some form, or at least a year. But then at some point, the conversation was settled, and also around that time, I'd left.
Got it. Well, before we talk about you and what you moved on to, what did product market fit feel like at Venmo?
Yeah, well, I was there for around 3 years, and the first 2 years was definitely not it because I remember for the first 2 years largely thinking about how this is more difficult than we anticipated. Eventually, a few things happened. Eventually, we got our regulatory system in order, so like we weren't dealing with that with a lot of our headspace. And eventually, it started feeling like you would encounter people in groups, and one of them would have already heard about it, or you would see people that you knew from college sign up. You weren't signing them up, and like they were signing up, and they were bringing their friends on. You started to see groups at the same time. And it just started to become a little bit easier to pitch someone because they had already heard about it a couple of times. And a lot of people wouldn't sign up the first time they heard about it. They'd be at dinner, somebody would bring it up, they would say no, let's just stick with cash. But like the third time that happened, like in year three, we were hitting like the third or fifth or seventh time somebody heard about it. And like maybe that means like 3 or 5 of their friends had it. And then it became much easier and things started to take off. And then there were some promotions done too. Like the growth team at Venmo put a lot of work into figuring out how do we get people on it. And like giving money away is the way you get people on it. And so like they started giving out larger and larger sums of money. Um, and in one of those waves, I think a lot of people signed up. A lot of people heard about it. And then when product market fit really kicked in and when things really started growing, I wasn't there then. But Venmo was such a special place because like it was very tight knit, very social, and like a lot of the Venmo people are still very good friends. So that I was friends with a lot of these people after I left. So like I was like just a little bit on the outside watching it all happen, and things grew really, really fast. There was a long period where new features weren't really being built that were visible to the users. It was all like internal cleanup, internal strengthening, tightening the systems. And I think it was a lot of chaotic activity inside. Very little change on the outside, just growth.
Amazing. Well, and you like proof of the fact that it was working, and so the users didn't experience anything different because the app and the product
Yeah.
was so tight.
It needed to do a simple thing, and it did that simple thing pretty well.
Absolutely. And so you left Venmo and went on to do something, as you put it, more right, and started an ed tech company. How did your experience as employee number one at Venmo shape and influence your approach to building Socratic?
When I say more right, what I mean is something that felt more like I wanted the team to feel and felt more like the product building process that I guess felt more natural to me. Um, Venmo did so many things really well, but it was chaotic. It did grow really fast. Even in the early days, it grew really fast, and like new people would show up. You're like, "Who are you? Where did you come from?" And like, somebody had been hired because he was playing squash with somebody else who was at the company, and they're like, "This dude is really smart. We should hire them." Like, we got a lot of really cool, unexpected people as a result of that, but it was a little bit chaotic. That was one thing. The other was for a long time, it didn't feel very clear what we were supposed to be doing. And then the third thing is the two founders were two of my closest friends. And I think there was like some amount of inability on my part to see them as bosses because the whole point was we didn't have bosses. And I guess I'm just like stubborn enough and anti authority enough that I realized I didn't really want to have a boss. I wanted to run the thing. And I felt like well, I could probably figure out something reasonably good and something that felt like calmer, but still very productive. Because when things are growing really fast and you're doing all kinds of stuff and you don't really know what direction you're in, like sometimes it feels like half the stuff you're doing doesn't need to be done at all. Like on reflection, I remember building entire things that like were complex, but kind of unnecessary. So I was like, okay, what if the next time around it was a smaller team? We were more thoughtful about what we were building and we still built something really cool. Is that possible? So I went off to figure out if I could do that. And turns out at some level, yes. It was just a very different experience, but I feel like I did end up building a team that felt like what I want a small team to feel like.
And on that point, so much of a company's success comes down to being able to recruit those special people and retain that talent. How did you identify those special people at both Venmo and Socratic? What do you look for in an early employee?
Yeah, I mean, I've done this so much and it's still like kind of hard to put into words. Like some of it is it when you see it. Like when someone's special, you get the feeling that you're talking to somebody whose mind is really turned on. They're thinking about the problems, they're not giving you rote answers. They have like some opinion about how to do things, what to do, what good looks like, and they're going to work hard. Like it's like a foundation, but like all these other things are not givens at all, and they're much harder to assess. So a lot of it in those days, especially, was like even now, actually, it when you see it. And Ikram and Cortina, the Venmo founders, were especially good at making the call. They're like very good betters and very good gamblers. Like they'll see someone and talk to them and make a quick decision, like yes, no, special or not relevant to me. And not in a rude, antisocial way, just like when it came to hiring, they knew what they were looking for and they had a feel for it. So yeah, they would just meet people and like very quickly be able to tell that there's like something special about this person. And they would look for signs like, are they really good at something? Like if you're an incredible musician, that's a qualifier. Like you're really good at something. You put a lot of effort in and you have like some taste around what's good in this realm. Are you really good soccer player? Do you just care a lot about DJing? And that makes you stand out and that gets you excited and your eyes light up. So that was one big part of how we hired. The other big part, as I was mentioning earlier, sometimes you just get lucky. You get a big group of people. Socratic was a little bit of both, but we definitely started off getting lucky with a big group of people. There was another ed tech startup I interviewed there to be the head of engineering. The head of product and I were like, we had that moment where we're like, at the interview, we're like, we got along really well. And I think this company doesn't particularly matter to either of us, but like we get along really well. And so when the company, like, the next day, I think, or the next couple, 2 days later, Chris, the guy who was interviewing me, messaged me saying, hey, this company is going to change directions. You and I, though, I think like we got along. Let's chat. Maybe we should do something together. So we started working together. Soon after that, that company did pivot and basically let go of the entire team. So there was the founder of that company was also an exceptional recruiter. He was so good at getting people excited. He had this like young Steve Jobs vibe to him where like you just believe, you'd want to believe what he was saying. And he told a really good story. And like he's done 3 very different businesses that I've seen, tells a great story about all of them. So he hired all these really special people from Waterloo, from other colleges, and then he let them all go. And they were all just there being like, hey, we're here, we're looking for a job. And the head of product, who is now the founder of this company, we like him. And so like I met with these people, we got along super well, and like we hired like the first 4 people we hired from that group. It was just get lucky.
Amazing. Well, and look, at Socratic, you've talked about constantly putting yourself out of a job. Why, as a founder, is that important?
As a founder, I mean, especially as like a builder founder like me, like I love writing code, but it's very clear that as a founder, you have responsibility to think about and answer a ton of very different questions. A lot of high level things, things no one's going to tell you, you need to answer this question. You have to be thinking about it. And in order to think about it, you need to have a few things. You need to have a view of what's happening across the company. And you need to have time and space to do things like talk to customers and to sit and think. If you're just doing the engineering job that you started off doing, you don't end up necessarily having that time and space. So for me, even though as much as I love programming and like most of the time that's what I would like to be doing, I've really had to push myself to stay in touch with it so I can still lead engineering, but spend enough time hiring people and trusting them and working on how that system works so that they can do as much as possible. And then I have that time and space to think about the bigger problems, to think about how to do strategy better or how to do product building better or how to make the system more reliable in ways that no one's going to ask us. We just have to think about it before it becomes really important. So yeah, it's been super important. Big leadership management founding philosophy for me is to put myself out of a job and then to find something new and more valuable to do at the company that nobody else is doing yet.
Well, in that regard, Socratic made a high conviction pivot after raising money for an existing product. You know, you mentioned giving yourself time and space to think about these decisions and really process them, talking to customers and so on. Walk us through that decision. What triggered it, and how did kind of first principles thinking get you there?
So at Socratic, we raised money, we had a board, and we knew we had to raise another round. Something that always struck me about board meetings is I love our board at Socratic, but often I would feel that the conversation itself was not as valuable as the prep we did for it, where we would have to step outside of our daily work, think at a higher level, figure out, remember the big picture, make sure we're on track, make sure the big picture still makes sense. Fundraising is another such time where you have to tell a lot of people a story. And like at some level, you're just trying to tell a story that works and gets you money, but you're still really thinking about what really makes sense. What do I believe? You're questioning your core beliefs in the business and making sure the vision you had still makes sense. So we were raising our Series A, and we spent a lot of time building this product that did quite well. We had a Q&A platform for high school students to help each other. We had a lot of contributors. We had people who contributed like 300, 600 days in a row. They wrote answers. Like amazing stuff was happening on this website, and it was growing organically. SEO traffic was like doubling every year. A lot of great things. But when we were raising this round, we realized we're going to have to make money someday. And that's a whole other story of how little we thought about it, but it was always like this thing that would happen in the future. But we knew that we needed some way to have a direct relationship with our users because we were completely SEO driven in the first product, and we were not the front page for anyone. They wouldn't even often know about Socratic. Google was the front page. They would go to Google, they would type in their question, and we might show up or we might not. So we were always at the mercy of this other party that would give us traffic and that would have the main relationship with the users. So we felt like we have a lot of usage, a lot of great activity, but we don't know our users. They're never going to sign up for accounts. There's no real reason to, unless they ask a question, which very few people do, and they don't really know us. If we're ever going to monetize this thing, we need to have a relationship with our users, and we need to provide them with deeper value than like a maybe I'll get an answer on this kind of service. So we paused and we took a step back. We used to do these offsites every year. We would go somewhere far away from New York and like spend a week just thinking about big problems. Usually things that wouldn't affect us in the near future, but like 6 months later would become really important, or a year later. At one of those, we sat and thought about this problem of how do we develop a better relationship with our users. And like mobile apps were an obvious thing. We didn't have an app, and our product as it was wouldn't make sense in an app because it wasn't good enough for you to go there first. You would still want to go to Google first. So the question we set out to answer was, how do we make a thing where people will want to come to this app before they go to Google? And to do that, it needs to be at least as good as Google. It means like you should be able to go to it with any question and get an answer that's at least what you can get from Google. But ideally, it's better. For the things we're really good at, where we have something special, we should give you a way better experience. And how can we do that? And so much credit goes to Chris, who is one of the smartest product thinkers I have worked with and runs a really cool company now called Granola, which is just doing super well. Like a lot of people I know use it.
We're users here.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Chris is brilliant. And he's very good at this kind of like just understanding what the user wants and what's going to feel special to them and like what's possible. Something that was starting to become possible then was machine learning and AI stuff. Like this was 2016, 15, 16. So like early AI days. Um, but we sort of stumbled on this problem that users have, which is when a student goes to Google, right now they have to type in this long homework problem they have because they're looking at this thing they need to solve. So anyway, the context is you're a high school student, you're trying to do some work. You're trying to solve a homework problem or you're studying for a test. You're stuck on a problem. Usually when you're stuck on that problem, you don't even know why you're stuck. Like you don't know what you don't know. So you have this question. You don't know what you don't know about it. The easiest thing to do is just to type the whole thing in. When you type the whole thing into Google, it's a mess because the way Google works is they will show you things that have a lot of matching keywords, and homework problems are kind of designed to look like other homework problems, but be slightly different. So you'd end up getting these other problems that were not the thing you're looking for. Now you look at those, you're even more confused. So we realized that Google has this big problem is that text input is a mess. We figured that what if we could get access to a search API? We could at least always provide what the search engines would provide. But on top of that, what if we could take one step further and understand what your problem is asking about? Do some machine learning stuff, do some classification, and get you a much more accurate answer. And that's basically the solution that we came up with for why we deserve to be the first thing you went to before Google. Because in the worst case, you would at least get what Google would give you. But in the best case, we could solve the problem way better using our classifiers and our in-house knowledge that we'd gathered. So that was the kind of first principles thinking. Like, how do we solve the same problem for the same user, but discard everything we know about our current solution, add a new constraint, which is it needs to work on the phone, take in everything else that comes with that, that like if it's an app, it needs to be worth going to first. And then how do we design a good solution for the user using those constraints and using new technology? Because the advances in AI that happened around then, like computer vision becoming a thing, they were huge parts of what made Socratic work. And like being on top of it and not trying to build things ourselves that somebody else was going to do better, that were like beyond our capabilities, and to like add our special product specific, use case specific layer on top of these AI models actually sounds like how a lot of AI stuff is going today. And this is the stuff we were doing in 2016. It rhymes a lot with a lot of things that are happening today.
No, for sure. And, when you talk about Google, Socratic was ultimately acquired by Google in 2018. With the benefit of hindsight, was that the right decision for the company?
Well, it certainly made a lot of sense. And so, was it the right decision is a difficult question, and I'll get to that. But it certainly made a lot of sense because we were basically building a, a use case specific search engine that did a lot. It worked a lot like Google works. You go to a bunch of different backends, get answers, you decide how you're going to mix them together. You add your special layer of understanding to get really good answers in specific areas. So we basically built a search app. So like we had that kind of like mindset. So that was one element of a good fit. And the Google team we joined really wanted product and engineering leaders who were entrepreneurial and wanted to build new things in this space because they were interested in a very similar space. That was another really good fit. Also great, you get paid really well at Google. You get really nice bonuses. If you get acquired, you get even nicer bonuses. You have a very interesting peek at how this incredible company works. You get to work with amazing people, etc. Like all of this great stuff comes along with it. And your careers, if you want a career like that, is like so much better off if you're in a place like that than at a small 10-person startup in New York. All great reasons, but was it the right decision? It's still like kind of an element of how independent do we want to be? How much do we want a boss, or in this case, many bosses with many layers of bosses above them? How much do we want to be in control of our destiny? And you can do that a lot more. For way lower pay, you can have much higher freedom at a startup. And there was this other thing, there was this opportunity. Like, if this opportunity didn't exist, maybe I would say it's obviously the right thing to have gone to Google. But the opportunity that did exist was related to all this deferred business thinking that we had. We pushed off thinking about the business model because we thought it'll work out eventually. There's like one class of businesses where that does work out, where you just think about users and it does work out eventually. And it's an ad based business where you just spend all your time getting eyeballs and then you put ads on the thing. And you did the hard part of getting eyeballs, and now the ads, they just make you money. We never wanted that to be the business model. But that's what we had basically built for. We had built a thing that had a lot of eyeballs. And I remember in the last couple of months when our cash balance was getting really low, we're like, maybe now is the time to take this seriously. And we did. And we put it on. And it made a bunch of money. But at that point, like the ball was really already rolling on the acquisition. We had already kind of like mentally left that space we were in. Uh, the Series B fundraise convinced us that like anything other than an ads business was going to be really difficult. And we still didn't really want to do the ads business. So we didn't take it seriously enough. Looking back, that could have been an independently running, profitable entity that just did what it did, put ads on it, and made a bunch of money. That's the little thing that's in both, I think, Chris and my minds, in the back of our minds, like, that maybe that could have worked.
Fair enough. Well, you've since, gone on and left Google to co-found Maven, chasing that magic feeling again. And so, one-time early employee turned two-time founder and going, and as you alluded to earlier, probably never gonna stop working for yourself, and not having the authority figures above you, uh, in
I
telling you
think
what
it
to
has
do.
evolved on that, I will say. I
Fair,
never said never. But yeah.
fair enough. Well, in thinking through that, you went from early employee to being a founder. How is being an early employee similar to being a founder?
Um, you have a tremendous amount of ownership and you have a tremendous amount of control over the shape of the thing you're building. Like, I was the first employee at Venmo, but most of the time I didn't feel any different than the other founders. Like, we worked the same way, we thought very similarly, we were comfortable making cases about anything. Like, I didn't feel that much of a difference between me and them. We were very much peers. Um, So yeah, the feeling of ownership and control and like being in control of your destiny, being able to shape the things, having the freedom to try big things without getting permission. Like, I had that. I could go off and build whatever I wanted to build, and like redo the entire homepage and bring it back and be like, guys, what do you think of this? Is it better? And they'll be like, yeah, we should ship this. We shouldn't ship that. Like, there was so much freedom. So those elements of it really feel very similar to being a founder. And then there's like really big differences, which when I was at Venmo, I didn't appreciate the differences. I was like, we're all doing the same thing. Like, I don't get why you're so much more stressed than me, or I don't get why you made this decision. And then I became a founder. And then I had to be responsible for fundraising and hiring and firing. And there's a huge difference on those fronts. Um, there are so many problems at Venmo that I was somewhat shielded from. I wasn't in the conversations where they were being told that this makes no sense or this will never work or like, we're not going to fund you because of whatever reason. Like, that blow to your ego or your self belief that like you have to constantly deal with. You don't have that as a first employee. You also have to solve a way smaller set of problems. Like, you don't have to be responsible for people and conflicts between people. And there were plenty of those. There's always going to be those when you have a big group of people who are like motivated and energetic, like they're going to have different beliefs and you're going to have to mediate between them. Or someone is not going to be working at the same bar as somebody else and you're going to have to deal with that. Those kinds of things as a first employee, you're so shielded from in a way that's really good because your job is not to solve all those problems. Your job is to build things or do whatever your function is. But yeah, when I started my own thing, I understood so many things about why the founders of Venmo did what they did, and like my appreciation for them grew as I had to deal with it. Similar to how now that I have a son, my appreciation for my parents grows every day. Like, I get what you were saying. I get this. I understand this feeling that you told me about. I had no idea about.
Yeah, you recently became a dad. It might be too soon to tell, but any signs of how being a dad might change your perspective on entrepreneurship in general?
Uh, that's still TBD because I feel more energized about my current company than before the baby was born. But one thing it definitely does, which I had heard about but also didn't know what it would feel like, is it really sharpens your focus and discipline becomes so much more important. And it becomes easier to be disciplined because you have this very powerful driving force. You have to balance your time between a bunch of things. You have to you can only do so many things in a day. And like that's so obvious because you have even less time to do those things that you have to be very good about choosing which things you're going to do, which ones you're not going to do. Um, when I'm at work, I'm like so much more on than I was before in a way that I think other people can see and feel. So yeah, it really sharpens focus and like raises the discipline level. And if you're like, as me, I've decided that I'm going to keep doing this thing, it deepens my resolve to make it work. Like, it becomes more important that if whatever path I'm choosing, I better do it really well. Because there is the alternative of you go work at some other company that has raised a bunch of money or that has a more obvious future and you make more money, like very simply. Like, you make more guaranteed money every month. Um, but when before my son was born, I wrote a letter to him he's gonna get 15 years from now, and in that, I wrote a bunch of advice. I started writing a bunch of advice for him, and then I really simplified it because there's too much to say. But one thing I realized in that process is the main way he's gonna learn how to be is by observing me and his mom. All of these things I wanna say to him, I should look at them closely and ask if I am doing those things. Will he just learn those by observing me? And I realized in a bunch of cases, he might not if I'm just acting the way I act today. So if I want him to learn these things, I have to act accordingly. I have to become the person that this page describes, and then he'll just learn those things. I don't need to write him a letter. So that was a big force in pushing me to be more thoughtful about what I'm doing every day and to do the things I'm doing a little bit better. Um, I guess that doesn't exactly answer the question of how it changes my views on entrepreneurship, but I think it mainly deepens my resolve that if I'm going to be doing this thing, I better do it really well.
I couldn't agree more with you and the sentiment with two kids of my own. I think that's a fantastic place for us to end and a very poignant one. Thank you, Shreyans, for the time. For anyone listening, we'll have all of the show notes and Shreyans's amazing artifacts and his blog in the notes. So please check those out. Thank you again, my friend, for joining us today.
Thank you so much. This is fun.